Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm stoked to be here. I was going to say grateful, but I don't want to be too grateful. I'm Giacomo Bono, and I'm going to do something virtuous today. And you're probably thinking, oh, you're going to tell us how to make grateful kids in schools, right? And that's why you're going to be virtuous. I'm going to try to be in the middle between Andrea, who talked about teaching gratitude to young children, and to Sarah, who talked about nurturing relationships to build and using gratitude to nurture relationships into higher quality relationships. I'm going to be somewhere in the middle, like a good virtue, according to Alex Wood. Oh, sorry, Aristotle, I meant. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Youth Gratitude Project that has fallen under the umbrella of this gratitude initiative that we've all been here today to learn about. I have to say that I'm very much indebted and grateful to Jeff Froh and to Bob Emmons, my mentor, for this work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and give you some tips for promoting gratitude in school-age children and adolescents, so in high school as well. There were several components to the Youth Gratitude Project. There's some measurement research. There's also basic research with children, so like 5 to 11-year-olds. And then we have an intervention study that I'll tell you about that constitutes our gratitude curriculum. And then finally, I'll close with some longitudinal research. We tracked teenagers who were about to enter high school and then were just finishing high school, so for 4 years. These are the main research projects in the Youth Gratitude Project. And in between there, I'm going to sprinkle some tips. So let me tell you first a little bit about measurement. One of the things that we're doing, we realized quickly that the gratitude on research in children was going to be highly limited by the fact that we don't have the tools to measure gratitude. After all, how are you going to do the research on gratitude if you don't have the measurement tools? And so one of the first things we started doing was creating a scale that would work. And we took a very simple task. We took the GQ6 that many of you may be familiar with, and we basically tried to use more developmentally appropriate language. And we developed a GQY for 7 to 11-year-olds that looks like this. And basically, we used a format that many of you who may be familiar with Susan Harder's measure of self-esteem. Basically, we used a format that is more understandable for children. Are you like this or not like this? And it's a two-step decision. So are you like the kids on this column or the kids on this column? And then once you decide that, then how much are you like that? And so we have a GQY for 7 to 11-year-olds. We also use the regular GQ6 language with 12 to 16-year-olds, but also using this format to see if we can improve it psychometrically. And we're currently testing the psychometrics of these. We need to gather some more data. And we also have a parent report measuring the gratitude of your child using this measure that you see here. We're also looking at some other things in this study, things like modeling gratitude. So if a teacher, this is more for parents, but you could sort of translate this to the classroom. If a teacher is more grateful, is that modeling gratitude, and is that likely to influence children? And there's a very good chance that modeling is the invisible factor for promoting gratitude. If you want grateful kids, be grateful. They're looking to you as an example, even if they might seem unappreciative for your efforts. Let me get to another study that we've done, a qualitative study looking at generosity and appreciation in children. We started doing this project to figure out, well, what do kids see as blessings? And what do they do to be kind? And so we asked teachers to run this for us with 5 to 10-year-olds, and we asked them to instruct students to name 3 ways that kids your age, that students your age are kind to others, or a way that or a kindness that kids your age appreciate. So we gave them we asked them to describe 3 things. And they could either pick generosity or they could pick appreciation. And then we took their descriptions and we coded them. And here's what we found. Among the 5 to 6-year-olds, we found the following themes. Helping an injured friend, sharing food. And the reason I starred these is because actually all the way up through 10, kids are both appreciative and kind to other kids with these themes, helping injured friends and sharing food. So you'll get a lot of mileage out of encouraging this kindness and appreciation of this kindness. We also found other themes with the 5 to 6-year-olds like protecting a friend or helping to clean up and returning things. What you'll notice in these themes with the 5 to 6-year-olds is that they're very simple, very much the golden rule. Well, look, when we looked at the 7 to 8-year-olds, what we started to see was a little bit more psychological relevance. There's meeting psychological needs of friends. We start to see empathy growing. Among the 7 to 8-year-olds, we saw sharing personal items, right? So a book that you know a friend really likes that you have. Helping them learn a skill or activity like a game or a sport. Helping them with school assignments. And it gets even more personal when we got to the 8 to 10-year-olds. We saw things that were more socio-emotional in nature, like encouragement. Emotional support was really high among girls, but not as high among boys. Boys, on the other hand, showed more social inclusion. So if a friend was left out of a soccer game, you asked them to be on your team. So there were 2 patterns that emerged, overall patterns. One is appreciation was mentioned much less than generosity, which underscores the fact that we can do more to teach children to be mindful of the blessings they receive. Often we just feel good and we forget to think of the why. And as Andrea was pointing out, we could better scaffold that in children and teach them to be more cognizant and aware of the blessings. So that's one pattern. Another pattern is that we started to see more overlap between the appreciation and generosity themes. With the 5 to 6-year-olds, they were sort of haphazard. They mentioned things that they were, in ways they were kind, but they didn't necessarily overlap as much with the things they appreciated. By the time we got to the 8 to 10-year-olds, we started to see much more overlap, and it was very much progressive, indicating that the kindness was more personally delivered. In other words, it was more empathically connected to other students, to other friends. What this says to me is that other people matter. To quote what is on the late Chris Peterson's tombstone, positive psychology is really, and I would even say resilience, is really about tuning in to the people who make you better. Let me tell you about the gratitude curriculum. This has the most relevance to schools. We did a study where we introduced 3 cognitions, 3 social perceptions that seem to underlie why people feel grateful. And one is the personal value or meaning of the gift. A second is the cost to the benefactor. And then the third is the prosocial intention of the benefactor. We engage students in, we have the teacher or a facilitator engage students in role-playing, in discussion, and in storytelling. And so we did this intervention where we randomly assigned people to either a benefit appraisal curriculum or to an attention control condition, basically a control condition that didn't involve teaching the benefit appraisals. And the idea was we can teach these benefit appraisals, and that is one way to teach gratitude without even really talking about gratitude. We can teach the skills to tune into beneficial exchanges with others. And what we found was that this led to greater positive affect or well-being, and as well it led to more thanking behavior. So that's our theoretical model. We ran this study for 5 weeks. And then we followed them up over the course of 19 weeks. And what you can see here are growth models basically showing change in the benefit appraisals. We measured their benefit appraisals, and indeed, we were able to strengthen kids' benefit appraisals compared to the attention control group. We also found that we were able to increase grateful feelings in students with this curriculum. And finally, positive affect also increased. In one of the studies, we taught the curriculum every day for a week, and then there was an opportunity to measure thanking behavior because they had this PTA conference, and it was really cool with multimedia. And so we asked students, look, the PTA was nice enough to put this together. If you feel like it, you know, it would be great if you wanted to write a thank you note. Or actually, I mean, we didn't word it like that. We made it very, you know, if you want, you don't have to, you can write a thank you note, we'll collect them and give them to the PTA. And indeed, what we found was the kids in the curriculum wrote more thank you cards, 80% more. Let me get to the longitudinal research. So we looked at 10 to 14-year-olds, about half and half, slightly more girls, mostly white, but some Asians and blacks and Hispanics. Let me ask you a question. This has been this has been in the public consciousness lately, gender inequity, and what does it mean to be a good male? You know, there's been a lot of talk about empowering girls, but do girls now have the moral upper hand? So I created a gratitude IQ measure to compare the genders, and here's what we found. Girls were more grateful at the beginning of the study. That gap slightly narrows by the end, but still, girls seem to be more grateful. Indeed, we also found some other patterns. Boys were also engaging in more antisocial and delinquent behavior, and in these data, we found that increasing gratitude seems to reduce delinquency in boys. So not only are boys less grateful and tuning into friends as well as the girls, they're also misbehaving. On the other hand, girls were more prosocial and more grateful. Okay, so here are some of the findings of the longitudinal study. We looked at gratitude in the first year, and we found that it was related to subjective well-being. So in other words, more positive emotions, fewer negative emotions, greater subjective satisfaction with life, and a greater sense of happiness. We found that gratitude at year 1 was related to increases in subjective well-being 4 years later. We also found that gratitude was related to reductions in depression 4 years later. Hope. Hope is strongly related to positive youth development. It's an indication of thriving, and we found that gratitude was related to increases in hope. Another indication of thriving, meaning in life. We found that gratitude at year 1 was related to greater meaning in life 4 years later, and we found all sorts of reasons this may be happening. The grateful kids they had more role models, they had more caring teachers, they were involved in more extracurricular activities, they just were busy self-improving. Naturally, this should lead to more meaning. We found that gratitude was related to prosocial behavior 4 years later. Again, these are increases. So 4 years later, more prosocial behavior. 4 years later, gratitude led to greater social integration, which is another form of prosocial behavior, which is using your strengths to improve your community. We looked at the opposite patterns. Does prosocial behavior lead to more gratitude? And we found, yes, it does. 4 years later, the kids who were more prosocial were also more grateful 4 years later. And we found here some interesting gender differences. This was especially true for boys. So if we could just get boys to be more kind to their friends, that's one way to create more gratitude naturally through their social relationships. I'm sort of getting short on time, but I glossed over the fact that the top finding there, gratitude leading to more prosocial behavior 4 years later, that finding was stronger for boys. So boys would benefit more if they practiced gratitude more. Another interesting finding was that social integration, using your strengths to help your community, also led to greater improvements in increases in gratitude 4 years later. And here's another gender differences. This was mostly with girls. So, some conclusions. Encourage empathy and being thoughtful with friends, because relationships are the way we become autonomously our own person. Gratitude helps children become the best person they could be, their own authentic person in the world. We could teach and train benefit appraisals in the classroom, right? There's all sorts of efforts in schools like blended learning, where you could work cooperatively, have students work cooperatively, especially with older students who can mentor them. These are some, you know, these are ways that students are learning in schools, and we could also be infusing gratitude, the curriculum, into this naturally, just teaching them to understand the personal value of blessings, the cost to the benefactor, and the prosocial intention of the benefactor. And what we're doing in the future, hopefully, is to use this gratitude curriculum, using those benefit appraisals to thank more effectively. Like Sarah was mentioning, thanking, to really complete the grateful experience, you have to make the verbal connection and thank others who helped you. And finally, practicing kindness is something that boys would especially benefit from. It's a great way to teach and instill gratitude. And using your strengths to contribute to the community, this is something that would be especially beneficial for girls, and helping them feel like a valued member of society. These are two things that would help us eradicate some of the gender inequities that we see. And, you know, it wasn't too long ago that we had a misogynistic tragedy happen just down south here in California. I urge us all to think about how we could make, yes, all boys more grateful. And as well, I think it'll help the girls. So in conclusion, I don't have a slide for this, but I would like to thank the folks who have been mentors and influential researchers in my life, including Phil Watkins, Alex Wood, who helped early on to come up with the benefit appraisals, and Bob Emmons, the John Templeton Foundation for funding this research and our book, Making Grateful Kids. We think it's a great way to improve character, and we hope to see more practice of gratitude among youth. Thank you.